Much of England's finest traditional countryside is in the Midlands and some of the most beautiful in Shropshire. But it's also under threat. Incentives to increase food production, especially after the Second World War, have led to changes in farming practices and a resulting loss of wildlife habitats and landscape features. One way to conserve our countryside is to pay farmers to manage their land sympathetically. Traditional farming not only shapes the landscape, it helps to maintain its wildlife. But is it in the farmers' best interests, or are we turning them into little more than park keepers?
In Shropshire, we're losing 1% of all our key wildlife habitats every year. And certain areas like the Long Mynd here are worse than others. The key issue here, as in many areas, is down to agricultural practice. And it's not so much the farmer as an individual who's to blame, it's the system that they find themselves working within. The government is trying to do something about it. It is introducing what is called an environmentally sensitive area, one of a number throughout England. And what that does is to pay farmers to positively manage their land for wildlife and landscape benefit.
A British initiative now being taken up in other parts of Europe, environmentally sensitive areas, ESAs, were introduced by the Ministry of Agriculture 6 years ago. Unlike set-aside, where farmers are paid subsidies to produce less food, ESAs were set up to preserve important landscape for primarily environmental reasons. Shropshire has two areas, the Clun, now in its 6th year, and the Shropshire Hills, launched in March.
The landscape in both is unique and historic, and therefore the hedgerows in both of them and the trees in both of them are very important that we maintain them and don't let them deteriorate. And the Ministry of Agriculture's advice from English Nature and the Countryside Commission was that indeed they should look to having an ESA in the area of outstanding natural beauty to safeguard these particular things, particularly the moorland and the ancient hay meadows and the historic features, the ancient monuments and so on. The Clun and the Shropshire Hills is both designated as severely disadvantaged land, but there is a bleaker agriculture in the Shropshire Hills.
This ESA, really the prime objective is to safeguard and conserve the landscape. Now when you're looking here, you've got a pretty good cross-section of landscape features that we are interested in. You've got the open hill over here, the rounded shoulders of these hills, which from the top work down to the hedge lines, and the linear effect of all the hedges is a kind of main feature of the Clun ESA. And then you work down to the bottom where you've got the more wooded valley and the river line. The other aspect is that on the tops of these hills there is quite a depth of soil in a number of places, and arable cultivation does take place and corn is grown. And what we're trying to get back is the permanent pasture.
Farmers have to enter all their land into the scheme, nominating the tiers or levels of management they agree to work with throughout their farm. The higher the tier, the higher the payment, but the more restrictions put on the farmer to preserve and protect the environment.
In the old scheme, which is rather easy to understand, the Tier 1 ground that is really all the ground that you can farm quite happily without any danger at all. The ground I put into the Tier 2 was ground that really it's not safe to put a tractor on. Now if you look at this big hill coming down with the two woods on the top of it, before we had four-wheel drive tractors, anybody coming down there was going to go straight into the wood at the bottom. So it really is not on. It's just a nice grazing field, a simple grazing field for stock. And that hill I've put into the second tier because we don't want to muck it about, we don't want to plough it. But the Tier 1 are the flat fields below here, which we harvest and which we can put fertiliser on and make a normal job of farming it.
The ESA scheme is a voluntary one. After the launch, a series of surgeries is held where farmers from the new area can talk to the project officers who administer the scheme. The officers from the Farming Advisory Service ADAS explain what will be required from the farmer in each tier and help them decide whether or not to join.
That's a beach shelter belt down there.
Yeah.
The grants available vary, but a typical annual payment for an average-sized farm in the scheme could be £3,000. Taxpayers currently fund the 33 ESA schemes to the tune of £27 million a year.
This is all permanent.
Yeah.
That's allay, this is barley,
Right.
and that's permanent. But I think probably that will have to come up. There's only 3 acres.
Just looking at that very briefly at the moment, we're looking at probably bringing the land in as Tier 1, what we call Tier 1A and Tier 1B. Okay. Tier 1A is your arable and lay grassland.
Yes.
And then Tier 1B will be the permanent grasses.
Permanent pasture, yes.
This doesn't mean that we're going to have like conservationists or anybody all over the ground or anything, is it? No.
Agriculture hasn't got a big labour force, particularly in this area, and therefore someone has got to come in perhaps and help the farmer do these things. The hedge maintenance, for example, the hedge layering. And family farms, where there are family farms, where there are sons or daughters, this may continue. But a lot of farmers' sons say to me, I don't want to be a hedge layer, I want to be a farmer, I want to grow things.
What you can do is put in a figure between 1 and 2 metres per hectare per year into a hedge management programme, with the end objective obviously that you finish up with a stock-proof hedge.
I think essentially, I would love to be able to get around all of my hedgerows.
You can spread farmyard manure onto extensive permanent grassland, but only at the rate of 5 tonnes per acre in one dressing every 3 years. 5 tonnes.
So we have to fill some more forms up, will we have to?
No, that's it. That's it now. That's the form filling more or less done. All we've got to do now is once these forms have been processed by MAF and we've got the draft agreement map from our cartographers, then we will come back and look at the farm in detail based on that information and whatever else we find that goes on to say onto the draft agreement map.
We are trying to add what information we can to the farmer's map to help the project officer when he goes out on his farm visit. So from the farmer's map, I can look at our environmental record, which shows us details of sites of special scientific interest, prime sites and common land, and check whether any of those fall onto this actual application. The next thing we're looking at is checking the actual what's been put on the farmer's map. We have aerial photos, these are infrared photos that we have for the Shropshire Hills, to check that the appropriate tier has been put on for each field, to check the woodland, position of ponds, trees, farm boundaries and hedgerows. We also can add on historic information to that map, and it will then go to our cartographers to produce a final digital version of that map.
Barry, we're coming on to the field 1900, a 14-acre field, which you've put into the highest tier.
Yes.
Is there a reason you wanted particularly in that? You realise that this is the most restrictive tier of all, and I've got to be sure that we're spending the money properly.
Yes, well, I've never put any fertiliser on here. I notice these ant hills have got little gardens on the top, which doesn't grow on the flat part.
Yeah.
And I believe they're valuable for woodpeckers and that.
And these take a long, long time to build up, don't they?
Well, they were here when I came 36 years ago, and they're about the same size, I think. There's more of them. Yeah. They've expanded a bit.
There's quite a lot just in and around. Very interesting. And what do you do with the thistles?
Well, not much. A few get cut with a scythe, but it's never sprayed or You can't get a tractor up here anyway, you see.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I thought it might suit for that.
And of course, by leaving the thistles to flower, it's a habitat for the butterflies.
And yeah, goldfinches we get too. Yeah.
What else have we got here? The gorse?
Well, that gorse, yeah, I always clear a little bit at a time, but I've always let some more regrow, you know.
Well, we wouldn't object to that in the ESA. We'd rather encourage some that you keep it where it is, but also some rotational cutting.
That's right. There's a piece growing up there new, and that one's will regrow eventually.
Because it is a habitat and a feed for birds and butterflies.
Yes.
You can see butterflies flying around now.
Well, we get yellow hammers and linnets nesting here.
Barry, we've sorted out most of the top boundaries. Now we come onto the bottom end of the farm, and we're looking down into the old cider orchard, which is that
One
field
there.
you've marked A on the map.
Yes.
And you marked it A because you think it should be in Tier 1A, presumably. I think we have to have a closer look at that because it is probably an old cider orchard. You do presumably produce cider?
Well, I still pick the apples each year, but nothing's ever done to it otherwise.
Barry, we're now in the old orchard, perhaps not in the best place to see some of the better trees, but how many trees do you reckon were here when it was planted?
Well, I'm told they planted 365, one for each day of the year.
Farmers in the Clun generally maintain their hedges very well, and here is a hedge here that will need pleaching in the next few years, but it's been maybe 10, 15 years in rotation. But in front of us here, we've got one that was done this year. It might look a bit bare to a lot, but it soon grows through, and as you'll see, when a hedge like that is pleached well, makes a very good stock-proof hedge. What will be required, though, is a fence along this side, because sheep, if they graze this field, directly the shoots come out, they'll graze in the bottom, and therefore, when we are pleaching hedges, we always try to back fence them so the stock doesn't take the bottom out and undo it. If we go further down, there is a hedge there that, if nothing is done, will deteriorate considerably. What happens is that will, although it's gappy now, it will become more gappy as they grow older, and in the winter period they get very brittle and will break off.
Where this farm used to carry around about 6 or 7 people working here in the late 50s, to today we were down to 2 men. And with the ESA, we've been able to get either contractors in to do the actual hedging, or, as in my case, we've been able to put an extra man on to do the traditional works that we used to do 25 years ago.
Most of us did maintain the hedges before the ESA came about, because that's why I believe they made it an ESA area, because of the beauty in the hedges within this area. You know, the hedges had not been removed prior to the ESA, and whether we come out of the ESA or in it, you know, we've no intentions of ripping edges out.
One of the main reasons for setting up the Shropshire Hills ESA was the landscape of the Long Mynd. It's heather moorland, a fast disappearing habitat unique to Northern Europe. The Long Mynd is a site of special scientific interest because of the wildlife sustained by the heather. It's a beauty spot, visited by school trips and weekend walkers, but it's also common land. A number of farmers have grazing rights here for their sheep. Sheep numbers have increased as have the tourists, and much of the heather has gone.
The problem here is quite simply there are too many sheep. There are too many sheep because there are common rights here that give us some 26,000 sheep potentially on this hillside, and for many, many years the farmers in this area have been paid by the government various allowances per head of sheep they put upon here. Now at the moment we probably don't have 26,000 sheep up here, but we certainly have around about 20,000. Now, that is far too many. We have 6 sheep per hectare at the moment. We need 1. If we can get down to 1, then the heather, the bilberries, and the birds and the animals and the flora, whatever that live off that ground cover, will be able to survive and come back. At the moment, grouse numbers, for example, have gone down dramatically, and there are only the odd handful of pairs left here.
Well, I would agree there probably is overgrazing in some areas, but this is purely due to mismanagement of the bracken and the heather cover. Longmynd has now 47% bracken cover. So that means there's 47% less grazing for us as graziers. So the sheep are flocking onto the other 43% of the common, which obviously causing problems in some areas.
Once privately owned, the Longmynd was bought 30 years ago by the National Trust. The graziers on the hill say that when the land was in private hands, it was managed differently. The heather was regularly burned to regenerate it, because heather over 10 years old doesn't provide grazing for sheep or cover for the wildlife to thrive. But while the National Trust attempts to control the spread of bracken with aerial spraying, they've been advised that traditional heather management by burning can no longer work here because of the larger numbers of sheep.
I think that the hill wants better farming like it. When I started on the hill, the Lord of the Manor used to burn a lot of the hill, you know, and the sheep spread out better. I think there's too much of the hill now they can't graze like. They won't eat dead heather nor old heather nor.
The Trust is very keen to carry out positive management in terms of heather regeneration, but we've had a number of specialists who have advised us that actually to try and regenerate the heather is doing more harm than good, because what happens is the young seedlings are immediately ripped out by the sheep, so we're actually losing heather by doing positive management as opposed to gaining and regenerating heather.
As you burn, the stalks are left sort of as needles, if you like, in the land, and the sheep don't like walking over where the heather's burned, so they tend to, you know, shy away from those sort of areas where they are burned. You know, you may see a wee bit of heather pulled up, but it's not in vast quantity.
If the commoners decide to join the ESA, such problems could be tackled. Sheep numbers need to be reduced by 60%, and the farmers compensated for the lost income from having fewer sheep on the hill. In order to join the ESA scheme, all 18 of the active commoners who graze the Longmynd need to reach agreement, sign a contract and manage the common land between them. If they can't reach agreement, the heather could disappear altogether.
I think most of the people wouldn't want to do it like. Well, at this stage, they're not very happy over it anyway. But we've had several meetings, but there's still a lot of questions I want to answer, you know, and firm answers. It doesn't seem to be thought through very well, so.
Then once your sheep is gone, like, if things fall through, you'll have no sheep nor nothing left, will you? Like, your money will be gone and your sheep will be gone.
Once in the scheme, farmers can take up an optional conservation plan. That allows them up to £2,000 over a 2-year period for capital work on their farm. The money can be used for restoring historic buildings. Clun farmer Tom Jones is hoping to restore a number of old buildings on his farm.
Tom, you were saying that you'd re-roofed this last year, was it?
This was done last summer, and it was after the storm damage from the winter before. But the doors with it We want to put them back to traditional.
Have you got
drive-through.
the old furniture, the hinges and things?
We've got the hinges and that they're just inside.
Because that, you know, we could certainly help you towards doing that. You need a new door. What I'd like to look at is just the other side. I see you've got the old... No, that's plastic, isn't it?
That above is the old one.
Yeah,
But, that is the old metal.
Yeah.
Metal
Because
line.
that's what we'd like to see if we can get replaced, because you've got the plastic one on the other side, I noticed.
Can you get metal ones
You
made
can.
nowadays?
You can. A bit expensive, but you can. But you'll need to obviously make this door up.
This is going to
And
be
what,
rebuilt.
you'd put a
here.
new, rebuilt, and you'll put a new frame in and a door.
Yes, so
Yeah.
there's got to be the doors as well.
You haven't got the old door for that one.
The old door for that one has gone. But if you can see here now where we've got the problems with these again, it's the timbers.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we can certainly restore those. Okay,
Radio Bob, we'll have to go this way now to
get
see
round the other side.
To see where that archway is.
Okay. Right, this is the end of the barn. Looks as that was a full circle, Tom, not an arch.
In my time it hasn't been, but there used to be a door coming halfway up.
Yeah.
But you can see by it, probably there.
You were saying that
part of it has
they
fallen
tipped the
away.
Swedes in here to
Swedes
Swedes
used
house
to
at the
go down.
bottom.
Yeah.
So the door came up to about this level. Right?
Like in the winter when you get here, and if it gets blowing, you do get snow across here,
Yeah.
so it really needs a
Oh,
door on
it
there.
must have a door. It must have a door. I think, Tom, we want to complete the circle. Let's go and have a look at this floor, though.
Right.
Oh, you've got a door.
Yeah, so
You
there's
didn't say
always
you
been-
had a door.
But I didn't think this was the original one, but it is.
It's a pretty old one, isn't it?
That's pretty ancient.
Yeah.
Well,
Obviously, what you're wanting to do would be eligible under the scheme.
good.
What I would need, though, is an application form from you, which you've got, because
Yeah.
that came with the pack. A plan showing you where the building is, so we can identify it.
Yeah.
I suggest you get a spec, right?
Yeah.
But then from that spec, get some builders to quote.
To fully renovate this traditional barn is going to cost Tom Jones something close to £20,000. The most he could expect to get from the ESA conservation grant is £4,000, but he still feels it's worth doing.
I could take you to several farms in the area where the traditional buildings have been knocked down or are in very, very poor condition. Well, not saying that these are that wonderful, but they are worse than this, and that they have no chance of being renovated. We are very lucky that we have a chance here to save these buildings. Otherwise, they'd be lost to the country as a whole.
But not all farmers in the Clun ESA have the same opinion. Some believe the basic objectives are not clear enough. Others have found the management rules for some tiers too restrictive. After the first 5 years, 16% of Clun farmers who entered the scheme have dropped out. Roger Williams is one of a number who farm land along the River Clun Valley.
I couldn't put a figure on it. Just within the locality that we live in, there's 7, 8 local farmers that have come out. And that's just within our Newcastle top line.
6 years ago, when this ESA started, it's done its 5 years, it's now in its first of the next lot. Incomes were very, very down. You know, they'd taken a fair battering. And I think the restrictions put on us on this ESA were very limited. And most farmers felt they could live with this and went in purely, I think, for financial reasons.
When we entered into it 5 years ago, we were told that we had to put 2 patches of land in Tier 2. We found we could live with it for 5 years, but it simply become unproductive, and this is one of the patches of land which we had to put in Tier 2, and it is the only really dry patch of land that we have to outwinter our cows on. And under the rules, the cows are not allowed to poach the land during the winter, and as you see, as they come to and fro to this feed area, we can't help them doing it a little bit. Some farms, as I explained, did not have to put land in Tier 2. We were told at that particular time that if they couldn't have these 2 patches of land in Tier 2, we were not wanted.
Well, I think it must be stressed that it's a voluntary scheme, and so if there were more drawbacks than benefits, then the farmer would be quite in his rights to stay out of it. But my own personal view is that it is a good scheme, but I think this present limitations on ploughing of old pastures is possibly a mistake. I think farmers don't plough pastures just for the hell of it, but I think they would like to be able to plough up one that is worn out. But then there is a chance for them, they can consult their project officer and possibly get it put in, so it isn't absolutely out of court. But I think for a 10-year period I would like to have seen a rather more creative objective. They've got a tier in now for restoring old pastures back from getting them to revert to their old ways rather than being in the new style they're in. I think this may backfire on them a little bit if the thistles take over, as the ground has once been ploughed and worked. They are very apt to come back, the filth that come back better than the old-fashioned grasses. And I think this is something that will come out over the 10 years.
The benefit to us all is that we have something which is nice to look at, which is nice to live in. We have safeguarded the habitat that's here, the wildlife, and at the same time we have enabled that farmer to do it for us. In other words, I think the money is well spent through ESAs. He is being compensated properly for doing something. He's not getting something for nothing.
The younger people who have got the challenge of wanting to make every acre work like they did just after the war, it's natural that they don't want to have any sort of pressures put on them for any form of restriction. So I think they, on the whole, are far more suspicious than we chaps who are a little bit older, who have slogged it pretty hard up and down these hills. It's quite a hard life. And as John Tench, our project officer, said, it's a business decision you can take, and it's in some cases it's quite a nice income coming in for not doing quite so much.
I believe in the more birds you've got, the less bugs you've got, and the crops are healthier. Although, as I say, down here you couldn't do that in the same way. But this is how I've always thought. I don't think we're that clever, you know. We don't know it all yet, and a lot more to be discovered, because everything depends on something else next door, all the way through.
What we're trying to do here is to maintain a farming system that has created this landscape. Right? It would be wrong to say park keepers. That is not what we're wanting, because that gives the impression that there is no management input. In fact, it would be disastrous for this landscape and this ESA if that management input stopped. And therefore it is vital for the objectives of the ESA that a viable farming remains.
The UK leads the way in attaching environmental conditions to farming practice, and it seems that taxpayers welcome that lead. A report by Newcastle University on the Somerset Levels ESA found that people would be willing to pay 5 times as much to farmers. It remains to be seen whether Shropshire's farmers can be persuaded that a return to traditional farming is worth their while.
43 bid, 43, all in front at 43 bid for number 3, bidding, 43's on my left, 43 bid to number 3, out right to the 43, bound bid to number 43, Selby left in, last time bids left, Selligan done at 43, Mr. Rowlands.